And now, Chapter 28 of The Last Boy on Earth, The Wizard's Den. In the dark recesses of a burned-out basement, a lone figure lay panting, nearly dying of thirst. He was ragged and dirty, surfing on the edge of death, while deep inside him another force was at work. Fenris lay in pain in the cinders and smoky earth, while within him the minuscule piece of Grendel multiplied and grew in consciousness, knitting the wounds back together into solid flesh. Grendel worked on a cellular level, sending out tendrils and chemical messages to the were-dog's body. The actions of the boy and his people, the newly awakened metal and fiberglass men of the ruined city, had reduced him to this pitiful state. Bent but not beaten, the tenacity of his sinews and the hunger of his mind vowed never to bow again, never to give up, and never to die. As he rebuilt the were-dog's body from the inside, he had to draw upon his own vital energy, drain his own essence to the point of near non-existence, but only just. The long nights passed and gave him time to think. Now that he was rid of Dr. Grindel, he realized that over time he had been influenced away from his original purpose. As hard as he worked, he couldn't rid himself of the idea that the form he occupied was human, and if he succeeded in his bid to rid the world of these viral creatures who killed the oceans and polluted the skies and made the earth infertile, the boy would be right. He would still have within him the last human being. A reckoning would still come, and the boy would die. Ironic, he ruminated, that the battle in the river helped him solve his final problem. The form of this were-dog was perfect as a host. Although the creature was beginning to morph some human characteristics, he was still essentially a dog, longing to please his master. And he would give him a master now. The world had never seen such a master. He would dominate this dog. Certainly, the creature had a human hand, a result of some still mysterious genetic manipulation deep within the strands of DNA, shuffling the nucleotides and ester bonds to create something nature had never seen before, abomination. Why this was happening was unclear to Grendel, but he supposed it didn't matter as long as he had the advantage. "Fenris," he whispered to the internal world of the were-dog. There was a universe in there. "Fenris, can you hear me?" The were-dog's mind began to hear, as in a dream, and like a good dog, he responded like a beaten cur cowering in a corner. "Master?" "Yes, Fenris, I have saved you. The humans shot you. They destroyed your body, but I am still here within you, and I am glad to be here." "Master, Master," was all the were-dog could muster from his reserves. "I am here to heal you, to make you strong. It will be different now that you and I are together. We will help each other, cooperate, and grow strong. Will you help me?" "Master, Master," was the poor dog's only response, but it was enough. Like a long note plaintively struck against the immutable silence, sleep descended upon Fenris, while Grendel gave all his focus to the reworking of the physical body of the dog. "Yes, I believe he's still alive," agreed Dr. Grindel. "How? We all saw what happened in the river. I mean, he exploded," Kaylee replied. The trio treated Dr. Grindel's revelation with suspicion. Do that one again. The trio treated Dr. Grindel's revelation with suspicion. They wanted to believe that this strange episode in their lives was over. There was much to consider and even more to do before their next step. Thinking about the possibility of Grendel's survival only distracted them from what Joe said was their primary purpose. "There's only one task for us now. Anything else is extra. We need to build the transmitter and antenna and make contact with the other survivors. It's our primary mission. Nothing else matters." Joe spoke from an internal sense of time. He did not speak of it to them, but he thought of his own death far too often now. How long before the new batch of insulin ran out? It would be soon. Heat and insulin do not get along well. He marveled that he wasn't so much afraid of his own death as of the death of these other three. He knew he was their last best hope at connecting with the others, somewhere out there. You know what? I don't care about Grendel, even if he somehow did manage to survive. And if he did manage to manifest into another host, we have a window of opportunity before he gains enough strength to attack us again, Joe explained. The autobiography of Benjamin Franklin urged, "Time is of the essence. We must work and forget any time for relaxation and leisure. The grave waits for no man." Brady related his words to the group. "Really? Well, good thing I'm not a man," Kaylee interjected. "I don't understand. Do I offend?" asked Ben. "Never mind," Brady answered. "She's just pulling your leg." The book had spoken to them once, but could not speak to any of them now. Brady had to be the intermediary. Hugin and the statues could all communicate with the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, but the humans had only gathered enough of the New World to make the connection once. Brady wasn't sure why, yet. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of activity at the Bangor Public Library. Joe sat at one of the large oak tables in the reference room and explained his plans in detail, writing them on pads of graph paper he'd scrounged from behind the main desk. "I believe we can build this thing within a week, maybe 2, but Brady and I will need to go scavenging. We'll need to go back to my workshop in East Corinth." "Why?" asked Brady. "Can't you just build the transmitter here? There must be everything you need in town." "Yes, we'll have to spend valuable time searching for it all. Yeah, besides, I don't just need any tools. I need my tools. I spent 60 years amassing a very specific collection of them, and they'll make the construction of this thing much easier. Now, don't argue with me. I know what I'm doing." "Why do we have to build it? Why can't we just get a transmitter from someone's house like we did when we found you?" asked Kaylee. "Well, we have to put this thing together because any transmitter bigger than 200 watts is going to be fairly rare," he said. "How big do you want it to be? How powerful?" asked Brady. "Very powerful. I want at least 2,000 watts, hopefully more. We ought to be blasting out a signal almost as strong as Tatiana's," answered Joe. "Well, how powerful is the Radio Ukraine transmitter?" "I'm not sure. I guess about 10,000 watts. "Is that a lot?" "Yeah, it's too much. That's why they can only transmit for short bursts. A standard SSB ham radio that you find in a ship at sea can send out messages as far as, say, 6,000 miles with only 150 watts. Our transmitter is going to be much stronger than that." "Won't that mean we're going to need a lot of power?" asked Brady. "Yes, it will," answered Joe. "Well, where are we going to get that kind of power?" asked Brady. Joe looked up from his rummaging and said, "Oh, you leave that to me. I've got that one covered, I think." Brady began to see a sense of urgency in Joe's tone, something underlying every word. He didn't say anything to Kaylee because he wasn't sure what he was sensing, and he didn't have a relationship with Dr. Grindle yet. The poor man spent most of his time sleeping, and when he was awake, he often babbled incoherent thoughts, rambling about things that none of them could understand. Brady began to wonder if Dr. Grindle would be of any use to them. Perhaps he would be more of a burden in the long run, but he was one of them, human, and they would care for him. His union with Grendel had stripped him of something essential. It was like he had been put back together, but with some parts missing, a jigsaw puzzle assembled by an impatient child with some of the pieces jammed in the wrong places. Brady worried that if things didn't improve for him, all of them would have some tough decisions to make. Still, even one more broken human made the world a better place, considering the alternative. As he had done with everything else, Brady gave the transmitter a name. He told it to everyone, the Great Device, even though Joe was the only one who understood what he was building. Kaylee lingered over the plans and asked enough questions of the old wizard for him to take her on as his helper, reducing Brady to the role of gopher. They scoured the local environs for the proper equipment. finding themselves in the hospital and in emergency response vehicles brought by the CDC and the military when they made their final journey north. Of great interest to Joe was the discovery of 2 satellite phones and solar chargers. "Here," he said to Brady, after examining the devices carefully. "Hold this and see what happens." "Okay." Joe dialed a number on the phone. Within seconds, Brady's phone began to emit a ringing tone. Amazed, Brady pressed the answer button and said, "Hello?" "Sweet Lord Almighty," said a stunned Joe, a smile gracing his face. "The military satellite phone system still works. I wonder for how long. You know, if the other survivors had one of these and we had their number, we wouldn't have to build the transmitter at all. Still, of all the damned luck." "Are you going to use these to help you build the transmitter?" asked Brady. "No, but these are our connection to each other. Don't you see? We can be thousands of miles apart, even on the other side of the world, and still communicate with each other. As long as the satellite system keeps functioning and these batteries are charged, we can communicate." "Yeah, but how long before the satellites eventually fail?" asked Brady. "Well, the satellites up there act like cell phone towers down here as relays to each other. I bet these even tap into the GPS satellites. So as long as even a few are functioning, these should work. But well, you're right. Nothing lasts forever, Brady. Everything we build fails in the end. It's the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy enters everything. A closed system always breaks down. It's one of the laws of the universe," explained Joe. "Doesn't make me feel any better," Brady said. "Relax, kid. Things usually work for a while before they break. We're all electrochemical machines. Our bodies work, and then they begin to fail, and then they stop working. Can't be avoided. That's the way the world goes round." They covered much ground, entering the homes of fellow ham radio operators Joe knew from the Rag Chewers Society, gathering as many items of use as he deemed necessary. Brady began to appreciate just how much of a wizard the old man was, because he understood things they didn't. He was a wizard because what was science to him was magic to Brady and Kaylee. After successfully raiding 2 labs at the engineering department of the University of Maine, Joe said all they needed now was to make a trip to his own shop in East Corinth for the final items and tools. With Dr. Grindle too fatigued to travel, Kaylee volunteered to stay with him at the library to help him recover. Brady was convinced that the trip to East Corinth shouldn't take as long as it did the first time. Joe insisted that they could be back to the library before sunset. After an eventful journey, Joe pulled into his own driveway. Even though the fate of the species was resting on his actions, Joe lingered in front of the doors of his shop, and time suddenly froze. He put his hand on the old brass doorknob and let it rest there for a moment before turning it and opening the door. Like any wizard entering his den, perhaps he was recalling other projects. Perhaps he was saying a quiet incantation for protection or success. Or perhaps, like most people, he was only remembering a magic with a mighty power all its own. Brady noticed that hesitation, but said nothing, concluding that all of them had been shattered by the abandonment, and that Joe was bearing whatever weight it had given him upon unsteady shoulders. His demeanor had changed the minute he walked into his workshop. This was his domain, and he did not politely ask in this realm. He proclaimed and spoke in the imperative. He had created this world over many years, knew where everything was because he had placed it there. This was his sanctum, his growlery, the wizard's den, and he was its master. He was suddenly impatient with everything at his fingertips. Sometimes throwing a part or a tool when things didn't work out to his pleasure, or when something wasn't where he remembered it to be, Brady was stunned by the change in Joe's personality. But he knew that somehow this was just part of his creative process. "Where the hell is that voltmeter? I left it right here. Now it's gone. Figures," he thundered at the silence and clutter. Similar outbursts would occur from time to time as he delved into the wide array of items, seeking out the necessary tools. The main room of the shop was large. Everywhere they looked were tables and workbenches covered with tools and arcane devices. In that corner was an arc welder and acetylene torch. In this corner was a metal lathe and bandsaw. A large wood stove sat hunkered down in that corner, and in the final corner was a doorway that led to a back room, full of bins and cabinets. It was really no good place to set down any of the equipment and supplies, because every surface and workbench was literally covered with piles of tools and materials, cardboard boxes of bits of metal, and coffee cans of nuts and bolts. "Get that box over here," Joe directed, "and the green one under the bench. We'll need it." While Joe lingered and thrashed over his workbench and the many shelves and piles, seeking the tools and supplies he would need to build the device, Brady let his eyes wander, soaking in the residual energy. There were hundreds of unusual things: wrenches, sockets, blades for various power saws, lengths of pipe, wood and wire, many suspended from hooks and pegboards that covered all the walls. There were hundreds of little plastic and metal drawers, perhaps 15 metal toolboxes and cardboard boxes whose contents remained a mystery. The whole place had a layer of dust and oily grime, and the odor that lingered in the air was one of ozone, welded metal, and paint thinner. The collateral effect was one of a latter-day Tesla, whose various batteries and motors, clamps, and collections of nuts and bolts held the world together. This was more than a building to Joe. This place, with all of its boxes and benches in seeming disarray, was an extension of his mind. The change that was evident in Joe now was no different from the change that might come over a master of a musical instrument when finally handed the score and asked to play. Something incorporeal emerged from the artist, and for a brief while the musician became the music. While in this workshop, each tool was an appendage linked to his body with invisible tendrils. Every part that rested on a shelf was part of him, and he could call upon each part at will. "There, that ought to do it," said Joe finally, as he handed the last toolbox to Brady to take up to the life seeker. As he left the workshop, Brady noticed Joe carefully closing the door, and he stood there a little longer and then turned to Brady. I'm going into the house for a few things," he said quietly. "You stay out here and secure the gear inside the life seeker, okay?" "Okay," Brady assented. He understood that Joe didn't want him inside, and he wasn't one to question why. He had a treasury of his own back in Brewer. After he had loaded the life seeker, Brady went to the back porch and sat in one of the lawn chairs on Joe's back deck. He liked it back here, overlooking the field and then the forest in the distance. That was where the attack of the weredogs had occurred, although there was no sign left of that struggle. As he sat there and the afternoon's breeze cooled him, he saw from the corner of his eye a black figure advancing toward him from the forest. As it got closer, it was clear that it was a Maine black bear, Bjorn. Brady descended the porch and met him on the back lawn. The bear bore a great scar across his face, but beyond that, he did not seem any worse for the wear. "Thank you," Brady thought, and the bear rose on his hind legs, his front paws raised in what looked to Brady like a high-five signal. "You're alive," the bear's thought reached Brady's mind. "Yes, but we might all be dead if you hadn't acted as you did on that night," Brady explained. "I'm happy," the bear said. "Where do you dwell?" asked the bear. "In the ruined city, down the long road and to the east," Brady thought. "I wish to dwell with you," the bear thought strongly. "Why? You're a bear. The whole forest is your home. Without people, you're the master in there," explained Brady. He was surprised that Bjorn could understand these more complex thoughts. He had apparently become more aware in the past days. "I am not a bear any longer. I am other. The other bears avoid me. I cannot speak to them. They cannot speak to me. I am away from them now. You can understand me. You are my not alone." Brady thought he understood what had happened. "You were affected in the battle with the weredogs. Fenris clawed your face. Maybe you've been altered somehow." "I'm sorry," Brady answered. "I am not man. I am not bear. I am other." Brady put his hand on the bear's shoulder and noticed how much he had grown. "You are bigger," he said simply. "I became more when I fought the creatures. I grew." "Strange," Brady said under his breath. "I wish to stay with you and the others," Bjorn insisted. "I am alone. I'm your friend. Brady knew what his answer had to be. For some reason, the fight with the weredogs had changed Bjorn into something else, something other. He was not recognized as a bear by the other animals, and was now separate from them. Perhaps that was the most human thing about him, his understanding of what it means to be alone. Life's good friends are very hard to find, especially when most of the species has perished. So what if he was a bear? Brady thought. Big deal. Max is a dog. Hugin is a raven. A friend's a friend. Will you ride with me in that? Brady pointed to the life-seeker. The bear looked over and snorted, Yes! Brady could sense Bjorn's obvious excitement, like a child at a fair. When Joe closed the door to his home, it was a bittersweet moment. He and his wife had raised 3 children in this house. He'd rebuilt most of it and spent the best portion of his life within its rooms. How strange to leave a place for the final time, he thought. He went from room to room, locking windows and closing curtains, emptying the trash, and he even went so far as to descend to the basement and turn off the main circuit breaker to the house, knowing that it was unlikely electricity would ever run through the wires again. He found a few things to throw into his suitcase, pictures, videos of his family along with the video player, of the thousands and thousands of items collected over his span of years. In the end, it didn't seem to matter what he took, only that he took. Undoubtedly, time and weather would tumble this place to the ground, and all would turn to dust, rust, and ruin. He needed to take what he could carry and leave all the rest, no matter how precious or fine. He grimaced as his knees' stabbing pain told him how old he was, and he knew the house and all of its contents would last much longer than he would. Still, a person doesn't live in one place for so many years and then just walk away. A small portion remains until the timbers rot and the roof caves in, and even then an echo lingers. He let his hand rest on the doorknob a moment before he pulled it closed for the final time. What mattered wasn't yesterday. What mattered was today. They pulled out of the driveway and back onto the road towards Bangor. Joe still hadn't told the others about the enormity of his plan, but it would all become obvious the moment he flipped the final switch. What he had in mind would be much better than anything they had imagined. His great device, his ultimate machine, his legacy to the human race. He nearly had a heart attack when he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the furry figure of Bjorn sitting on one of the seats in the rear of the life-seeker, the bear's mouth open to catch the cool stream of air coming from the open window. Brady, there's a bear in here, he said nervously under his breath. I know, Brady answered quietly. Joe, meet Bjorn. Shaking his head and grinning, Joe could only say, Well, I'll be damned. End of chapter.